what state the whistleblower is in, what state the other person is in, if there was consent, if it's a two-party consent state, so on and so forth. So just a little bit of things to keep your eye on, some traps that you want to try to avoid. The next slides I'm going to go through, and it's going to be rather quick, is this California Insurance Fraud Prevention Act. It's very, very similar to the False Claims Act in the sense that you can sue. You don't have to have standing. You can sue on behalf of, but it's on behalf of private insurance companies. It can be healthcare companies. It can be any type of insurance companies. But the whistleblower stands in the shoes of a private insurance company. It's very similar substantively and procedurally as the False Claims Act, except that in the California, you serve the California Insurance Department and the district attorney. California's statute is, I think Illinois also has a statute, but it doesn't really, it's not as effective as this California private insurance qui tam statute. So typically, if you think you have a False Claims Act case, you see if the conduct's occurring in California, if the fraud is being committed against the government, it likely is also being committed against private insurance companies, and you could potentially have a case. There's very little case law available because not many cases have been brought under the California Insurance Fraud Prevention Act, but I can say that the case law that's out there is modeled after the False Claims Act, and it's very favorable to whistleblowers and whistleblower attorneys. So something to keep your eye on if you work in California, and if you think you have a lot of California clients. This is something to keep your eye on. I think it'll be, as it becomes more and more well known, I think it'll be more and more utilized. And the percentages are a lot higher for the whistleblower. So instead of 25 to 30, it can be up to 50% of the recovery. The next two programs I'm going to briefly talk about is the IRS Whistleblower Program. The False Claims Act does not allow you to sue for tax fraud. However, the IRS Whistleblower Program does, and like the SEC Whistleblower Program, it's not really a case that you file in court. It is a tip that you submit to the IRS. The problem is that you have absolutely zero say in how the IRS investigates. If they investigate, you have no information about the investigation at all. If they decide to decline the case, you might not know why, and there's really not a lot of appellate rights. However, if they do take your case and they find, you might have a great case, it might not go anywhere, but you might all of a sudden get an email from the IRS and have recovered money, and it's not a whole lot of work. It's this Form 211 that you need to fill out, and it's like a complaint, but not, and you submit it to the IRS. Types of complaints that have been successful, I've listed here: tax shelters, manipulation of the recognition of revenue, fraudulent claim for tax credits. There is a $2 million limit, so if the award is always discretionary and only if it amounts to, if the IRS collects $2 million or above. There is also the SEC Whistleblower Program. It was enacted with the Dodd-Frank Act, similar to the IRS program. You don't file a case. You submit a form TCR. You can file that online. Find that online. There's a $1 million, not a $2 million limit for a discretionary award. And sort of similar to the IRS Whistleblower Act, you don't have a ton of control over what happens. Some of the types of tips is a bribery of foreign officials and basically securities law violations. Market manipulations, fraud that's brought under 10b-5, insider trading, backdating options, and Ponzi schemes are all the types of cases that have been filed under the SEC Whistleblower Program. And the SEC Whistleblower Program has actually given a decent amount of rewards. So, in summary, I hope that this, I had to go through it. It's a lot of material. I had to go through it fairly quickly, but this hopefully will be available to you. I also have a checklist that I provided that, if you're ever talking to a client and you think you might have a case, there's sort of a checklist to go through. Make sure there's government money involved or insurance money, or if there's a security violation, and sort of analyze the elements of the case. also, so that the case can have the ability to go somewhere. It's important that you keep in mind some of these other traps to avoid, and just having knowledge of them might be enough. And you could probably do some research of your own, or contact a False Claims Act lawyer, and sort of try to get your hands around some of these traps that you don't want to fall into. And as always, I'm here as a resource. This last slide contains my contact information, my cell phone number, my email address, and link me in. I'm on LinkedIn, and I am available for any, if you don't have questions on this, but maybe a case comes up in the future, please feel free to reach out to me. This is what I do, and hopefully I'll be able to steer you in the right direction.
Terrific. Shauna, thank you so much. That was so informative and I think really helpful. We are now ready to begin taking questions from our live audience. All attendees can submit questions via the Q&A feature on your webinar interface. And in fact, many of you have done that as we've been going along. And so if we don't have time to get to everybody's, I apologize, but we will do the best we can. So Shauna, one of the first questions we had is, are there any limits, I guess, on who can qualify as a whistleblower? Is it just rank and file people? Can it go all the way up to a, kind of director of a department or a political appointee? Are there any sort of limitations on that?
In terms of whistleblower, there are some limitations. But they're not many. I would say you can't be the architect or the creator of the fraud, right? And that's kind of common sense. It could be a director. It could be, I've had, CFOs that have maybe been, or chief compliance officers even, that have maybe come to the company, they saw what's going on, they try to do something about it, and they left. Those type of people that aren't the creators of the fraud, and they're very high up in the C-suite, they can be whistleblowers. I see a question here too about lawyers. Can lawyers be whistleblowers? Yes, lawyers can be whistleblowers. I've seen it done successfully. Obviously, there's some issues like with privilege and how you obtained your information that you need to really be wary of, to protect your license and conflicts and so on and so forth. But I've seen lawyers be whistleblowers. I've also seen lawyers, have some sort of inkling that fraud's going on, and perhaps found an investigator to dig in and get a whistleblower that they can represent. In terms of government employees, that's a little different. A lot of times, government employees cannot be whistleblowers. However, I have seen it done on a few separate instances, but there's a lot of loops that you have to jump through to do that. And I'm talking about the False Claims Act and probably the California Insurance Fraud Prevention Act. Under the SEC, there are if you have certain positions, again, there's certain reporting requirements. Like if it's your job to find fraud, and you probably can't then just turn around under the SEC and use that. There's a reporting requirement to the company, and like a certain time period you have to wait to see if the company does anything. If they don't do anything, and then you could file an SEC whistleblower complaint. But those are the restrictions that I pretty much know about, right now in terms of who can be a whistleblower.
Okay. And are you, it sounds like, many cases may remain under seal, so, I realize that you can't know everything, but to your knowledge, have there been any qui tam cases relating to any spending clause statutes like Title VI or Title IX?
I have not seen any cases, although that doesn't mean they can't be brought. I have, in terms of school cases, there have been a series of cases that a lot of the attendees have probably seen against for-profit schools, getting, federal funding for loans, and then, but having the school basically, break some sort of recruiting ban, regulation, or not provide an appropriate level of education. Those cases have been successful. They're difficult, but they have been successful, and I'm sure there could be, I'd have to know the details of the fraud. I have not seen a case like that, but that does not mean that it can't be done.
Got it. Okay. And then how would you know if you are the first to file?
So that's a trick. Sometimes you don't know.